what we are actually discussing is about strategic military leadership. And by way of introduction, and of course, sorry, I forgot to mention the course participants, course 5, 2021. And I'll just discussing with the Chief of Army Staff that when I was the DHMO at the National War College, then now National Defense College, I chaired a committee conceptualizing the establishment of the Army War College. Though this is my first time here, I'm glad that I'm part of this history. Now, by way of introduction, history has shown that there is correlation between military leadership and strategy. If we go back to historically known military strategists like Sun Tzu, the famous Chinese strategist of the 6th century, who mentioned that the success of the leader depends on his understanding, empathy, and self-awareness, and that a leader leads by example. Likewise, Clausewitz said to succeed, a leader needs to pursue his ambition with audacity and strength. While Alexander the Great spoke of inspiring and intelligent leadership that leads from the front. The qualities of understanding, empathy, self-awareness, and audacity, strength, inspiration, and intelligence not only depict how military strategists perceive to be characteristics of strategic leadership, but also that these qualities differ from one leader to another. The military is a unique institution known for its toughness, structured hierarchy, regimentation, strictness and discipline, obedience to orders, rigid adherence to rules and regulations, customs and traditions, esprit de corps, and sharing common set of values such as loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, honesty, integrity, and courage. As a result, military leadership must be built on strong values and character. The military is structured to have everything it needs to carry out its functions. Leadership in the military runs both vertically and horizontally, from the highest to the lowest. And at every level of leadership, there are command and control responsibilities. In the military, the top hierarchy exercises the widest discretion, and every other action down the line depends on what the strategic objective is designed to achieve. The military profession is guided by recognized principles, such as the principles of war, and these principles do impact not only on the general conduct of warfare, but also influence the decision-making process at various levels of leadership. Today, gentlemen and ladies, we are discussing military leadership and the emerging threats to Nigeria's national security. The focus, however, is on strategic military leadership, being part of the college efforts at developing the operational and management capacities of participants, as well as improving your basic strategic skills in the application of land power. You are the bridge between the tactical, operational, and the strategic levels. Although the emphasis is on land power due to the fact that this is an Army War College, having participants from Navy, Air Force, and other sister agencies shows that issues of strategy, leadership, and national security require collaboration, coordination, and cooperation among all stakeholders towards achieving a nation's strategic objectives. Now, the aim of this lecture is to present my perspective, and of course, the perspectives of others, on strategic military leadership and emerging threats to Nigeria's national security. And in doing this, the scope will be as shown on the slide. Now, defining strategic military leadership. The U.S. Department of the Army defines leadership as, and I quote, the activity of influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation to accomplish the mission and improve the organization. North House defines it as a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals in a new way to achieve a common goal, unquote. Both of these definitions point at influence, process, goals, and the achievement or accomplishment of the mission or goals of an organization. There are 3 levels of military leadership: the tactical, operational, and strategic. While the tactical and operational correspond to the direct and organizational levels respectively, strategic leadership responsibilities are broader in scope. There is more certainty and less complexity at the tactical level, where specific skills or technical knowledge are required. The operational level provides the link between the task fulfilled by the tactical level and complex decisions and guidelines of the strategic level, being the highest. For the purpose of our discussion today, I see strategic military leaders constituting the entire institution's high command, to include the service chiefs and, of course, the CDS, formation and corps commanders, principal staff officers, directors, and commandants of strategic institutions like this one, or their equivalent in the other services. But I also think the list widens if we include strategic thinkers who may be younger officers of the rank of major and above, who are staff officers to the strategic leaders, or those instructors and directing staff in higher military institutions. My position corresponds with that of U.S. Army Combined Arms Center, which defines Army strategic leaders as, I quote, those colonels and generals who lead in the strategic environment and those subordinate officers who affect the decisions made by those holding strategic decision-making positions, unquote. Overall, the strategic level is that which national security and political objectives are transmitted into war-winning plans and policies. Strategic leadership is therefore defined, and I quote, the process used by a leader to affect the achievement of desirable and clearly understood vision by influencing the organizational culture, allocating resources, directing through policy and directive, and building consensus within a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous global environment which is marked by opportunities and threats. This definition is in the context of the global security environment, described as volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The definition also emphasizes process, influence, vision, and consensus building as key factors in strategic leadership. It is at this strategic level that the organization's goals and objectives are established, and it is unfolding in an uncertain, changing, unknown, and complex environment because the strategic leader is the direct link to organizations outside military environment with different characteristics. In a lecture delivered to the U.S. Army War College in 2008, the 36th Chief of Army Staff of the U.S. Army, General George Casey, presented his own understanding of strategic leadership in terms of the roles, functions, and responsibilities of strategic leaders. Accordingly, Strategic leaders guide the achievement of their organizational vision within a larger enterprise by directing policy and strategy, building consensus, acquiring and allocating resources, influencing organizational culture, and shaping complex and ambiguous external environments. They lead by example to build effective organizations, grow the next generation of leaders, energize subordinates, seek opportunities to advance organizational goals, and balance personal and professional demands, unquote. Casey's definition is closely linked to that of the U.S. Army War College, in which he also refers to vision, policy direction, resource allocation, and leading by example as key factors for strategic leadership. We can also see a reflection of Sun Tzu and Clausewitz's ideas of military leadership in Casey's definition. As Chief of Army Staff between 2000 and 2011, Casey led one of the world's largest and most complex organizations with approximately strength of 1.1 million and an annual budget of more than $200 billion. General Casey is said to be credited with restoring balance to the war-weary U.S. Army and helping to modernize and transform the armed forces to meet the demands of 21st century warfare in a post-9/11 world. Prior to his appointment as Chief of Staff between 2004 and 2007, Casey commanded the coalition of forces in Iraq with troops from more than 30 nations, in which he led a cultural shift toward more nuanced military operations and built new Iraqi security institutions. According to Casey, the road to his achievement started with a clearly defined vision. The question I would always ask, he said, what are we trying to accomplish? Accordingly, it is important for most senior person in the organization to articulate a vision, after which leaders develop a strategy before seeking to build consensus around it. Casey described the process of building consensus in military decisions in Iraq, starting first by meeting with key members of the White House and then the Secretary of Defense. Leadership, according to him, requires personal courage, stating your convictions even when you know they are not popular. He stressed that leaders with strong values build strong organizations, and that leaders need to give back once they achieve success. In terms of giving back, Casey has been an advocate for military families, expanding programs for the wounded, addressing veteran substance abuse and suicide, and reducing the stigma of combat stress and trauma. Now to the qualities of effective strategic leadership. Is the strategic military leader born or made? The most dangerous leadership myth, according to Bernis, is that leaders are born. This myth asserts that people simply either have certain charismatic qualities or not. There are many theories that examine this argument, but suffice it to mention here, for the purpose of this lecture, that leadership can be learned, and this is what we are attempting to do in this hall today, and that certain skills of leadership can also be acquired from the environment. But it is also true that individuals can possess some natural qualities that are inborn in accordance with their genetic makeup. And we can see in the concept of the strategic genius by retired U.S. Major General Robert Scales. Writing about what he refers as the strategic genius, Scales identifies 4 categories of such genius based on certain strategic circumstances and attributes that define strategic genius in war. The general relates his categorization to Carl von Clausewitz, who said that, and I quote, "Every special calling in life, if it is followed with success, requires peculiar qualifications of understanding and soul. Where these are of high order and manifest themselves in extraordinary achievements, the mind to which they belong is termed genius, unquote. Clausewitz defines two distinct qualities that a commander must possess in order to be a military genius. These qualities are, first, an intellect that, even in the darkest hours, retains some glimmering of inner light, which leads to truth. And second, the courage to follow this faint light wherever it may lead. This courage is simply determination, which Clausewitz defines as interaction between three qualities, that is, ambition, motivation, and commitment, qualities that allow the leader to apply discipline in the exercise of his or her mental talents. Intuition, or coup d'oeil, that is the military leader's ability to make quick and knowledgeable decisions, according to Clausewitz, is one of the qualities of strategic military genius. Clausewitz argues that intuition is a critical trait that most good leaders possess, and that even in the application of the principles of war, it is crucial to have an inspired commander with this trait because it is vital for success. Going back to Scales, General Scales, his first category of genius is the combat genius, constituting such strategic military leaders who fight their battle by not sticking to the plan alone, but are flexible and innovative and ensure that they stay well ahead of the enemy by being imaginative in the application of combat power. Next is the political genius, constituting such military leaders who are able to swim in the political ocean and survive the sharks. That while this category of officers are masters of civil-military discourse, they know how to wield and meld the elements of military power with allies, coalition partners, and politicians. They also possess the skills to influence wartime policy while remaining subservient to their political masters. However, their key trait is the ability to offer meaningful and prophetic advice to civilian leaders while remaining respectful and true to their professional values. Finally, this category of military leaders can also develop within the military bureaucracy by studying the political arts and serving within civilian institutions that habitually rub shoulders with the military services. In the category of institutional genius, this is the third category, is a leader brilliant in his ability to manage a very large institution and represent its equities in line with the needs of the nation. Such strategic leaders are creative, selfless, and have the ability to restructure and shape budgets and legislation to meet the future needs of the service. And they learn strategic brilliance through a complex career path that includes combat service melded with deep immersion into the internal staff mechanisms that make the army run. Finally, the anticipatory genius is said to possess the unique ability to think in time and imagine conceptually where the nature and character of war is headed. Such strategic leaders are capable of piercing the fog of war and seeing into the future, for they are more intuitive than logical and linear. According to Scales, the anticipatory genius must be gifted enough to shape the institution to meet future generations ahead, and must also be able to meld visioning with the practical art of inducing achievable change. Sometimes referred to the seers, officers in this category of anticipatory genius are neither well known nor appreciated during their service period. However, that their knack for future gazing appears to be inherited, not learned. Scales further observes that the anticipatory genius is the most rare and precious of all four categories and/or attributes of the strategic military leader, and the least likely to be developed through any predictable pattern. In his conclusion, Scales observed that from experience, officers with tactical skills do not necessarily have great strategic skills, and that tactical and strategic genius are unrelated. Accordingly, officers with potential for strategic leadership are intellectually gifted, with special talent for seeing the future and conjuring a battlefield that has yet to appear. That they are more interested in studying warfare than practicing it, and they can think critically. Finally, Scales identifies the differences between critically talented officers and strategically talented officers as shown on the slide. Now, Macaulay and his colleagues refer to the soft skills of strategic leadership to include such attributes as sensitivity, creativity, conceptualization, verbal reasoning and communication, empathy, and spontaneity. Accordingly, these soft skills not only enable the strategic leaders develop the necessary mindset to discern the local, regional, and strategic shifts that are endemic within the global security environment, but also allow strategic leaders to work in a collaborative fashion with peers and subordinates to develop a more comprehensive understanding of the myriad actors who also have a stake in the global security environment. Accordingly, these soft skills enable strategic military leaders to possess a high degree of tolerance for diversity of opinion and procedures. For Macaulay and his colleagues, tactical competence does not automatically translate to strategic competence. And though the hard skills of tactical and operational levels are an advantage, they are not adequate to manage the ambiguities of an uncertain and continually changing environment where soft skills are required. Strategic leadership, according to them, require different levels of critical thinking, creativity, mental agility, intuition, vision, and communication. While observing how the American strategic generalship came up short at the strategic level during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, General Scales wonders what happened. He put the blame squarely on senior officers, mostly generals, who devise policy, advise civilian leaders, and command very large organizations. He further asked the question, how is it that a mid-grade officer can do so well as a tactical commander, and then, when elevated to a position of national strategic leadership, performs poorly? Now, Macaulay and his colleagues provide a number of reasons for such poor performance or failure at strategic level. The first, according to them, is lack of focus as a result of either lack of prioritization or the failure to define the desired end state, following the old adage that if everything is important, then nothing is important, jack of all trades and master of none. Where strategic leaders avoid making difficult choices or fail to prioritize, inevitably develop and follow strategies that include a little bit of everything, yet focus on nothing. The second reason is lack of clearly defined mission or prioritization in the situation where choices and decisions at the tactical or operational levels are inconsistent with the strategy. In this case, the lack of a clearly articulated vision or a misunderstood one leads to decisions at lower levels that may not support the higher level purpose. A third reason arises from the pressure to meet short-term goals, where such goals typically outweigh the far more important future considerations. In other words, strategic leaders tend to trade in long-term goals for short-term gains. The success trap is the fourth reason, such as using yesterday's solution to solve today's problem without regard to the fact that context has changed. Therefore, what worked yesterday may not work today. Where the institution changes, the approach to the situation must also change. And in the line of reasoning or problem solving of yesterday may may have lost its relevance for today's or current situation. Now, the emerging threats to Nigeria's national security. The 2019 National Security Strategy provides that Nigeria faces a diverse range of threats, which are multifaceted and less predictable, with blurred boundaries between external and internal risk factors. Accordingly, the fact that these threat factors manifest at the domestic, regional, and global levels and are mutually reinforcing, they require an integrative national strategy and cooperation within a framework of regional and international organizations as well as institutions. Specifically, the National Security Strategy identifies emerging security threats in terrorism and violent extremism, armed banditry, kidnapping, militancy, and separatist agitations, pastoralist farmers' conflicts, transnational organized crime, piracy and sea robbery, porous borders, cyber crimes and technology challenges, socio-political threats, fake news and hate speeches, environmental threats, public health challenges, economic challenges, and regional and global security challenges. Many of the threats listed in the NSS are not really emerging, and as serious as the insurgency in the Northeast is, it is surprised that it's not listed. A few of them are a reflection of the developments in the global arena, specifically of issues relating to globalization. The conflicts between pastoralists and farmers, for example, have always been matters of concern even before Nigeria's independence, except that they are exacerbated by impact of climate change. Likewise, cyber crimes, fake news, and hate speeches correspond to the global development on the internet communications technology. We are more concerned with insurgency, terrorism, and violent extremism in the Northeast, the banditry and kidnappings in the Northwest, the piracy and militancy in the Gulf of Guinea and the Niger Delta, secessionist agitation in the Southeast and Southwest, especially if it mutates to take the form of insurgency in the future. The list of threats in the NSS can be categorized into 4 groups. The first category that I made are those that threaten Nigeria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, which require direct military intervention in line with Section 217 of the Constitution. The second category are those that threaten societal law and order and public safety, which require the Nigerian police and other law enforcement agencies to tackle. The third category are those that threaten Nigeria's unity in diversity and corporate existence, such as militancy, separatism, hate speech, etc. While the fourth category are those that threaten the well-being and survival of citizens, such as poverty, illiteracy, unemployment, disease, hunger, environmental degradation, etc., which can only be handled through good governance. This presentation shall dwell more on the first category because it's the major concern of the strategic military leadership. Now, Northeast security threats. At the top of the emerging threats to Nigeria's national security is the insurgency in the Northeast. And although in existence since late 2010, the threat is still formidable. It started in the 1990s with a group of a few young persons nicknamed the Taliban, which grew to become what is now Boko Haram. And currently, Boko Haram uses terrorism and violent extremism to murder thousands of citizens and displace significant part of the population in the region. In fact, before 2015, Boko Haram had occupied 14 local government areas of Borno State. As of today, while Boko Haram has maintained significant activities in the whole of Northeast, including the fringes of Lake Chad, and has established presence in Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, The group has also linked up with other insurgent groups in the Sahel. Furthermore, the original Boko Haram is split into 3 factions: the Shekau faction, ISWAP, and Babakura faction, each with its own leadership, but with convergence on a common aim, that is, to establish a so-called Islamic State within the Northeast and the Lake Chad region. It is also a fact that the activities of these groups have spilled over to all the LCBC countries, in addition to their affiliations to ISIS, Akim, MNLA, Mujahou, Ansaru, Islamic State of Greater Sahara, and Al-Shabaab. Of particular note is that insurgents in Mali have succeeded in moving from the north to the center of the country, across borders to southwest Niger, to the north and east of Burkina Faso, and some spillover to northwest Nigeria. Where is the map? Next slide, please. Courtesy of The Economist. Next. These relationships among the insurgent groups, coupled with porous borders, make it easy for the huge influx of arms and ammunition across Nigeria's borders from Libya, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and other countries in the Sahel. The displacement of civilians in large numbers from their various communities and the abduction and enslavement of others, in addition to those killed, leaving orphans and widows behind, have led to huge humanitarian crisis. The administration and welfare of those in IDP camps and refugees in neighboring countries is a huge challenge, requiring multi-stakeholder strategic approach to deal with. Now to Northwest security threats. Like the way it started small in the Northeast, insecurity in the Northwest began with cattle rustling within the forest and gradually extended to elite farms, but has now metamorphosed into violent banditry and kidnappings for ransom involving motorcycle terror gangs who have made the forest connecting Zamfara, Niger, Kaduna, and Katsina states their safe haven. According to the International Crisis Group, at the root of the insecurity in the region is a long-running competition over land and water resources between predominant Fulani herders and mainly Hausa farmers, both of whom have over time mobilized armed groups for protection. A significant percentage of the rural communities bordering these forests have been displaced, while a number of schools have been closed because the bandits are targeting students and school children. No doubt Northwest and some parts of North Central are currently hotbeds of violent criminal activities. Such violent activities include kidnapping for ransom by mostly the youth in the herders community, attacks on herders communities by a state-sponsored vigilante called Nsakai, mainly in Zamfara and Katsina, ethnic war between the pastoralists who are mostly Fulani and the agrarian communities who are mostly Hausa, cattle rustling within pastoralist forest communities and against others involved in cattle rearing, whereby most of schooling cows are transported to Lagos and Aba cattle markets. These are serious threats to Nigeria's national security, for which attention is also focused on the military to tackle, mainly because criminals use military-grade weapons, including mortars and anti-aircraft guns, to attack their victims from the ungoverned forest where they establish bases. Other issues of security concerns include youth bulge among the hardest communities, with most of the youth being on drugs, unskilled, uneducated, and unemployable, and elite land grabbing, mostly by retirees and politicians with sudden interest in farming, and other highly placed persons with interest in gold mining in Zamfara, who forcefully confiscate land from herders and farmers. Drug peddlers and gun runners have targeted herders communities with their arsenals, which means high incidence of drug abuse and firearms proliferation. Poverty rate has been high in the Northwest, and the situation has been made worse due to the abandonment of farms by rural communities as a result of attacks on farmers. Likewise, most cattle markets where herders dispose their cattle to purchase food items in return have disappeared due to the fear of lynching against suspected herders, a situation which no doubt in itself is a threat to food security. Now, in the Gulf of Guinea and Niger Delta. The Gulf of Guinea, an area that stretches almost 6,000 kilometers from Senegal to Angola, is the hotbed of militancy and piracy. Armed robbery at sea, kidnapping of seafarers for ransom, theft of hydrocarbon resources on the high seas and illegal bunkering, pipeline vandalism, unreported and unregulated fishing, and illegal trafficking in arms, drugs, pharmaceuticals, and persons, a situation which seriously threatens maritime security. While the region produces approximately 5.4 million barrels of oil per day, with Nigeria accounting for 47% of the total oil supply, it is also estimated that the Gulf is the source of 2.7% and 4.7% of the world's resources in oil and gas, respectively. The region is an important international maritime route for commercial shipping. However, the region has become the focal point of maritime insecurity, accounting for 30% of attacks in African waters. According to the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel, out of 47 cases of piracy in 2013, 29 took place off the coast of Nigeria alone. Likewise, according to the International Maritime Bureau, the region experienced about 50% increase in kidnapping for ransom between 2018 and 2019. And overall, it accounts for over 95% of all kidnappings for ransom at sea globally. Militancy in the Niger Delta resulting in pipeline vandalism, kidnapping of oil workers, attacks on oil facilities, illegal bunkering, and other acts of sabotage has resulted in economic losses in revenue, environmental degradation, fire, and explosion. Now, the fourth area is secession threats and ethnic extremism. While we are still battling with violent religious extremism of Boko Haram in the northeast, we are beginning to witness violent ethnic extremisms by IPOB in the southeast, calling for Igbo nation, and OPC in the southwest, calling for Yoruba nation. These two groups have been making efforts to ignite nationwide inter-ethnic conflicts through their violent attacks on the northerner resident or transacting businesses in the south, as a quick way of achieving their end state, a divided Nigeria along what they refer to as ethnic nationalities. We see parallels between Boko Haram, a religious extremist group, and these ethnic extremist groups, IPOB and OPC. With regard to the path the former took to be what it is today, all these groups operate on the platform of extremism. They are all non-state actors. They all have separatist agenda to carve out states out of Nigeria's territory. And the initial phase of their respective projects involves attacks on security forces. And this is currently going on in the southeast. We can also remember the horrible attacks and acts of cannibalism against the police during the NSAS protests along Lagos-Ibadan axis. Now, the role of the strategic military leaders in tackling emerging threats to national security. The role of strategic leader is mostly futuristic, not just immediate future, but much further ahead. He is the Nostradamus gazing into what the security environments hold for the future. We have seen the strategic military leaders slowly transition from battlefield doers to national security thinkers. Today, we are dealing with violent non-state actors that operate across borders. We are fighting war on terrorism, engaged in counter-insurgency and violent extremism. We are confronted by violent acts of kidnappings and banditry, by criminals using military-grade weapons. The current security environment is also threatened by socioeconomic issues that constitute human security, to include extreme poverty, poor healthcare services, illiteracy, etc. In spite of the complexity and uncertainty of the security environment, the UN has projected that Nigeria's population would double by 2050. In the context of our experiences with today's security environment, what will the future look like for strategic military leadership, and how could it be settled? In a press statement signed by a presidential spokesperson on January 27, 2021, President Muhammadu Buhari, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, was quoted to have told the newly appointed service chiefs that Nigeria is in a state of emergency. This must have been very, very clear to discerning minds that the state of insecurity in the country had reached a crescendo. Therefore, expectations are very high that the newly appointed service chiefs will put the security environment into shape. In other words, it is expected that the top hierarchy of the armed forces will do everything possible to ensure that the threats to national security, particularly the emerging ones, are eliminated in order to guarantee the security and welfare of Nigerians. The role of military in tackling national security challenges is derived from Chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution, and if you go through the Constitution, they are clearly spelled out. The immediate role of the current military strategic leadership is to execute the presidential directive of securing Nigeria. In other words, the armed forces should lead other stakeholders in guaranteeing the freedom from fear by making the environment safe. Beginning with the Northeast, there is need to first review the war-fighting doctrine for the current CT coin operations, which look like a conventional war of attrition. Attrition warfare involves extended period of engagement to wear down the enemy and seeks victory through cumulative destruction of enemy's material assets by superior firepower and technology. Attrition warfare against non-conventional, irregular, non-state actors can lead to mission creep, the kind of situation insurgency would prefer. While I'm aware that the current adopted doctrine for Nigerian armed forces is the maneuvers warfare, it does not seem to be applied in the ongoing CT coin operations in the Northeast. Maneuvers approach is a doctrine designed to shatter the enemy's cohesion through series of rapid, violent, and unexpected actions, which create turbulent and rapidly deteriorating situations with which he cannot cope. The idea is to disrupt the enemy's decision cycle through maneuver, target the enemy's mind that is counter in terms of counter-narratives, and destabilize his entire center of gravity, such as the leadership, weapons, logistics, funding, and recruitment. Maneuvers approach aims at making the battle short, sharp, and crisp, with less casualties in both men and material. Second, the super calm strategy currently adopted by the Nigerian Army focuses more on force protection, most likely as a response of the vulnerability of troops to enemy attacks on the forward operation bases earlier established. The establishment of the FOBs was designed to dominate the battlefield and also to protect civilian communities, as well as shorten lines of communication. However, it also exposed the troops to mass enemy attacks, resulting in high casualty rates and loss of weapons and equipment. While the super calm strategy ensures force protection, it has made civilian communities more vulnerable. The super calm strategy is not in itself foolproof for force protection due to the fact that whenever troops go on patrols, they are still vulnerable to enemy attacks. It is therefore most important to create a balance between force protection and civilian protection. And I think this suggestion should be of immediate concern to the military high command. The fact that Boko Haram have made civilian communities their soft targets, failure of the military to protect these communities naturally attracts some unfavorable consequences, including the inability to win hearts and minds. There is need, therefore, to apply a strategy that would adequately protect both the forces and civilians. Following this suggestion, personnel of paramilitary institutions, particularly civil defense and police, can be used in reinforcing security in civilian communities under the supervision of the Ministries of Defense, Interior, and Police Affairs, while being coordinated by Defense Headquarters. Third, the CT coin operations in the Northeast will pose a lot of difficulties without effective regional cooperation, especially with the presence of insurgent groups in all the LCBC countries. The establishment of multinational joint task force shows the eagerness of the LCBC countries to embrace regional cooperation in tackling the insurgency. But since 2015, when President Buhari visited these countries, followed by his hosting of a meeting of the heads of government within the region, there has not been follow-up that I'm aware of. I think as part of their role towards tackling the insurgency, strategic military leadership should spearhead and pursue the consolidation of regional cooperation. The MNJTF, whose key mandate is to eliminate the presence of Boko Haram in the region, should be strengthened. It is expedient to re-examine its CONOPS, particularly issues concerning funding, political oversight, objectives, command structures, tasks, mission support, and goals. Aside these issues, the strategic military leaders should be concerned about interoperability of equipment and the training among multinational troops. Furthermore, efforts should be made to coordinate military activities among the MAJTF, G5 Sahel Joint Force, and Regional Standby Force in both ECOWAS and ECAS. On the side of Nigeria, there is need for unified command because it seems there are no clear relationships among the Theater Command, 7th Division, and Sector Command under MNJTF. The Multinational Joint Task Force itself is only joint at the level of command headquarters in N'Djamena. In other words, each member country operates in its own sector, and Nigeria's AOR is Sector 3. The porousness of borders is also a major concern. Therefore, attention should be focused on how the various institutions responsible for border security in the respective LCBC countries should cooperate and collaborate to prevent cross-border criminal activities, especially smuggling of weapons and drugs, and also break the chain of logistics activities and communications among various insurgent groups in the region. Lastly, the influence of France on the Francophone countries in the region and the U.S. AFRICOM establishment of drone bases in Agadez and Darkou, Niger Republic, should not be taken for granted. Currently, France is engaged in the CT coin Operation Barkhane in Mali, while the EU maintains the Takuba Task Force for the Sahel. Although under the command of Operation Barkhane, the involvement of Western powers in the fight against terrorism and insurgency in the Sahel should be examined with all seriousness. France, as the colonizing power of the Francophone countries, has interest still maintain a grip over these countries. Although the U.S. does not have a direct threat to her national security, one wonders why she is spending about $280 million as a 10-year cost of operating the $100 million newly constructed Nigerian Air Force drone base 201 in Agadez, in addition to deploying 800 U.S. Army Green Beret. With all these deployments by Western powers, the MNJTF troops of one contributing country cannot engage in enemy hot pursuit beyond 20 kilometers from its sector into any other country. Furthermore, most of Nigeria's natural allies in the region, both of the immediate and strategic neighborhoods, do not have the means to execute their own part of the war. Therefore, they largely depend on external powers to external support, including from Nigeria. And for this reason, it will be easy for Western powers to influence their activities to the detriment of the combined regional efforts, in contrast to AU's philosophy of African solutions to African problems. Nigeria's strategic military leadership must reach out to their counterparts in the region to consolidate their strategic military relationship with these nations. Although the role of the military is well spelled out in the Constitution, the complexity and uncertainty of the security environment make it difficult to determine the extent of this role in tackling emerging security challenges. Most citizens think that it is wholly the responsibility of the military to handle all matters of insecurity in the country. While, for example, the public was putting pressure on the president to sack immediate past service chiefs for what was perceived as poor outing, nobody was talking about the Inspector General of Police or other law enforcement agency heads whose primary responsibility is to ensure law and order and public safety in the society. Likewise, every of the 6 states maintains a joint task force, usually led by military, whose mandate is precisely what the police should be doing, maintaining law and order in society. The role of the military, strategic military leaders in tackling emerging security threats to our national security requires a holistic and all stakeholders approach. In other words, tackling Nigeria's emerging security threats to national security will require more than the use of force. Some of the security challenges require different approaches, such as mediation, negotiation, and dialogue. Security challenges, such as hardest farmers' conflicts, require an all stakeholders approach to deal with. For as long as there is land degradation as a result of climate change, competition over use of land and water resources by this group will remain, sometimes turning violent. Critical areas of attention for strategic military leaders. There are 4 critical areas of attention identified. These are intelligence, weapons and equipment, manpower, and troops welfare. According to the famous Chinese strategist Sun Tzu, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear this result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not know the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb to every battle. What this statement means is that intelligence is a critical area for strategic leadership to tackle the emerging security threats, to perfect their decision-making process and make informed decisions, to plan and execute city coin operations, to locate and destroy motorcycle terror gangs in the forest, and to make proactive moves in order to preempt banditry and kidnappings. Reliable and actionable intelligence is required. However, such reliable and actionable intelligence cannot be obtained unless the intelligence institutions and platforms cooperate, coordinate, and collaborate their activities. Second, the capability to monitor the enemy of all his character and activities must go along with the capability for timely response. However reliable and actionable intelligence is, it means nothing if it cannot be used when it is required to weaken, destroy, or eliminate the enemy, or preempt his actions. The issue of appropriateness, availability, and adequacy of weapons and equipment for troops fighting in the Northeast has been a recurring subject matter, which even came up again following the NSA's recent scathing remarks on it. Third, are the armed forces operating in full strength? Are there enough boots on ground? Do the combat units have full complements of what is reflected in the establishment? These are questions that the strategic military leadership should find the answers to in order to strengthen the tactical and operational levels of leadership in relation to their role in this regard. Fourth, the welfare and administration of troops in the battlefield is of critical importance. The efficient handling of casualties, the wounded, the missing in action, killed in action, and the welfare of their respective families are of utmost importance for the strategic military leaders to improve morale and commitment of the fighting force. The construction and upgrade of 44 Army Reference Hospital to Level 4 UN medical facility, which we undertook in 1929, was based on our strategic thoughts at that time, when we had no medical facility of such standard that would take care of tertiary medical requirements for our soldiers on peacekeeping operations then. It was also a way of leveraging on UN reimbursement scheme to develop and expand the Nigerian Army's healthcare facilities. I'm glad that it is serving the purpose today, particularly for the welfare of troops in the Northeast. The least we can do is to ensure that the soldier gets all his entitlements, because he is always the first real casualty of war. For once he leaves for the battlefield, he may never return. Aside the hazards of war, the soldier's tactical decisions in complex situations can have far-reaching consequences for operational and strategic levels. And it is for this reason Charles Krulak, a former US Marine Commandant, developed the concept of the strategic corporal. Challenges to strategic military leadership compared to contemporary times. In the course of my presentation, I mentioned many of these challenges, the strategic military leadership, and even suggested how to mitigate them. But I will just be specific on two more here. One is on human rights issue, and the other is on media, especially the social media. Fighting non-state actors in interstate conflict, that is where the enemy of the state is also a citizen of the state, is a complex business. It is complex in the sense that the enemy is not easily identified and sometimes blends within the local communities. Therefore, there is every likelihood of higher collateral damage when security forces strike. The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights observed in its fact sheet number 32 that in recent years, and I quote, "The measures adopted by states to counter terrorism have themselves often posed serious challenges to human rights and the rule of law," unquote. While non-state actors do not observe or even recognize the international humanitarian law and neither follow any rules of warfare, states are held liable for resemblance of violations, whether deliberate or not. Managing the conduct and actions of troops towards the enemy or suspect is a major challenge for strategic military leadership. And the Nigerian military has stories to tell, with the series of publications coming from such groups as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. From 2015, when the Buhari government came in, there has been so much campaign to deny Nigeria the opportunity to procure made-in-US weapons for the execution of the counter-insurgency war. The campaigners refer to human rights abuses, such as allegations against military and the CJTF on the treatment of suspected Boko Haram members detained in Giwa barracks in Maiduguri, even though the Buhari government inherited the problem. Using the Leahy Law Amendment, which prohibits the US government from providing military assistance to foreign military that violate human rights with impunity, the Nigerian government's efforts was blocked, only to be partially lifted when former President Trump approved the purchase of the Tucano aircraft for NAF. The new media or social media is another contemporary challenge to the strategic military leadership. First, it provides an open platform for propaganda by enemies of the state, mostly involving fake news and or hate speech that can go viral globally within seconds of posting. Second, there are incidences of leakages of official or even classified documents, either on policy issues or operations. Where such documents find their way into the social media, the damage caused is often irreversible. Third, the media is as gatekeeper, agenda setter, force multiplier, and fourth estate of the realm can be used to create a nation or destroy it. And the strategic decision-making process can also be impacted by negative reporting and further jeopardize Nigeria's religious and ethnic fault lines. Both the mainstream and social media have engaged in ethnic profiling, which has created negative feelings towards particular ethnic groups, a situation that could seriously jeopardize national security if not properly handled, just like the case of Rwanda. Ways of handling this mitigating these challenges. To mitigate the challenges to the military strategic leadership in contemporary times, in relation to its role in tackling emerging security threats, means to respond appropriately and adequately to right a wrong, or to change a negative perception that does not correspond with the reality. For issues of human rights accusation, mitigating this challenge calls for transparent acts, such as investigating accusations and punishing anyone found guilty following prosecution in accordance with the law. Furthermore, part of the training at all levels of leadership should include coping with human rights issues in such a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous security environment of CT coin. Handling the excesses of media, social or mainstream, is a delicate issue. The social media is a free-for-all platform that everybody with a registered handle uses to post opinions, views, advertisements, and entertainment, contribute to knowledge, share experience, etc. However, there are also the negative sides of it, which include child pornography, illegal and unlawful cyber activities, propaganda, fake news, hate speech, espionage, etc. Most users involved in such activities are faceless. Some use parody accounts, and they often hide under freedom of speech to perpetrate acts that are inimical to national security. The fact that the regulation on social media is very limited, it is left for individual countries to develop various means of countering negative issues affecting them. I believe this is in the domain of the intelligence community and the public relations departments that the strategic military leadership should make the best use of. In conclusion, the strategic military leader is the man who sees tomorrow, a Nostradamus of some sort, who studies the security environment of yesterday, examines that of today, and forecasts for tomorrow. While he occupies the top-level military leadership, his success is also tied to the tactical and operational levels. The strategic military leader must think deep and wide and be mindful of the fact that the strategic level is one of uncertainty and complex. His role in tackling emerging threats to national security is critical to the government's responsibilities to ensure the security and welfare of the people, in line with Chapter 2 of the Constitution. The emerging security threats in Nigeria's national security are enormous, requiring an all-stakeholders approach, and the fact that we have witnessed the mutation of conflicts from simple to the complex over time, nothing should be taken for granted. Thank you very much.